I always believed we were happy. Not the kind of happiness you see in movies with grand romantic gestures or whirlwind adventures, but a quieter, more enduring joy that grows steadily over time. Sophia and I had been together for 8 years, 5 of which we'd spent as husband and wife. She was my everything, smart, stunning, and someone who I thought loved me as much as I loved her. At least, that's what I let myself believe. The night everything unraveled started out harmless enough. We were at a party thrown by a mutual friend, celebrating his promotion to some senior position at a tech company. The music was booming, drinks were flowing freely, and the room buzzed with laughter and conversation. Sophia thrived in settings like that, effortlessly mingling with everyone, while I stayed in my usual lane, the quiet observer, sipping my drink and enjoying the sight of her lighting up the room. As the evening dragged on, I noticed Sophia drinking more than usual. I'd seen her a little tipsy before, but this was different. Her words were slurred, and she began saying things that didn't quite add up, or maybe they made too much sense. At first, it was just little digs, cloaked in the guise of humor. She teased me about my predictable routines, my so-called lack of ambition, and how I always played it safe. The remarks stung, but I shrugged them off. She was drunk, after all. People say things they don't mean when they've had too much to drink, right? It wasn't until I was helping her into the car that her words cut deeper. She laughed, but there was a sharp bitterness in her tone as she muttered, "I don't even know why I married you. I'm not attracted to you anymore." The world seemed to stand still. My hand froze on the car door, the other steadying her arm. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "You heard me," she replied, her words sluggish but piercing enough to cut through me. "You're boring. You don't excite me anymore. God, I've tried, but it's just not there." The drive home was suffocating. The only sounds were the low hum of the engine and her occasional sniffles as her emotions shifted under the haze of alcohol. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, her words replaying in my head like a broken record. Each repetition hit harder than the last. When we got home, I guided her to bed. She collapsed onto the mattress, muttering incoherent words before passing out. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the woman I thought I knew so well. This was someone I had built my entire world around, and yet, in a single night, she had dismantled everything I believed about us. It wasn't just what she said about no longer being attracted to me. It was the disdain in her voice, the casual dismissal of who I was and everything I had done for her. My mind raced. Had there been signs that I missed? Was this something she'd been feeling for a while but hadn't said? Or was it just the alcohol talking? And then, as if the night hadn't already crushed me enough, she mumbled something that stopped me cold. "I shouldn't have kissed him," she murmured softly. I froze, every part of me turning to ice. Her words were a brutal confirmation of something I hadn't even dared to suspect. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She had betrayed me. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. The hurt was too raw, the betrayal too overwhelming. My love for Sophia had been unwavering, and she had shattered it with just a few drunken words. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, let alone imagine waking up beside her and pretending everything was okay. Without a sound, I began packing. There was no anger in my movements, only cold determination. I grabbed only what I needed, some clothes, my laptop, and a little cash. I didn't want to leave a trail. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, my decision was set in stone. As I stood by the door with my suitcase in hand, I hesitated for a fleeting moment. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the overwhelming need to escape won out. I walked out without a word, the quiet click of the door behind me marking the end of one chapter and the start of another. Driving away, I felt a swirl of emotions: anger, heartbreak, betrayal, but above all, a sense of resolve. Sophia would wake up and find me gone. She would know why, and this was only the beginning of the consequences she would face for shattering my heart. Driving away from the house we'd shared for so many years brought a strange mix of emotions. It was freeing in one sense but equally terrifying. The glow of the streetlights flickered above as I navigated the silent suburban roads, my grip on the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. I had no destination in mind, but I knew I couldn't stop until I was far enough away. Far enough that Sophia wouldn't be able to reach me. She didn't deserve the closure of a conversation or the chance to beg for forgiveness. Not after what she'd done. The first stop I made was at a rundown motel just off the interstate. The room was as dreary as you'd expect. Peeling wallpaper, a faint musty odor hanging in the air, and a bed that creaked if you so much as glanced at it. But it was perfect in its own way. Plain, forgettable, and exactly what I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the worn-out carpet beneath my feet, my mind running a mile a minute. What was my next move? How could I ensure she wouldn't trace me? I pulled out my laptop, fighting through the motel's painfully slow Wi-Fi, and started dismantling the life I had spent years building with Sophia. The first thing I tackled was our shared bank accounts. I transferred my portion of the savings into a separate account I'd quietly set up months earlier. Back then, I'd toyed with the idea of starting my own business, and this account had been a just-in-case measure. Sophia had mocked me for it at the time, laughing as she said, "Why do you always plan for disasters that'll never happen?" Turns out, I'd unknowingly prepared for this exact disaster. Next, I composed a resignation email to my boss. I kept it brief and professional, citing personal reasons for my immediate departure. My job had been more than just a paycheck. It was a big part of who I was. But I couldn't risk Sophia trying to track me down through work. By the time dawn rolled around, I had erased every piece of myself from the life we'd shared. The house deed, still in both our names, would be hers to deal with. The credit cards, utility bills, streaming subscriptions, I left all of it behind. The only thing I left for Sophia was a letter. It wasn't for her sake. It was for mine. Writing it felt like closing a door, a way to say everything I needed without her interrupting or twisting my words. It wasn't long, just a few sentences scrawled on a piece of notebook paper. "Sophia, I heard everything you said, and I can't unhear it. You took something from me that I can't get back. Not just my trust, but the belief that we were a team. I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. Don't try to find me." I folded the note neatly and placed it on the kitchen counter where I knew she'd see it. Then I walked out of that house for the final time, locking the door behind me. The days that followed were a blur. I crossed state lines, stopping only for gas and quick meals at dingy roadside diners. One of the first things I did was ditch my old phone, replacing it with a prepaid one. Something simple with no fancy features. I eventually found another motel to stay in, slightly better than the first, and began searching for a new place to settle down. I ended up in a mid-sized city a few hours away. It was just the right size, big enough to blend into the crowd but small enough to feel manageable. I found a clean, affordable studio apartment, paid 3 months rent up front, and began piecing together a new existence. Every so often, my thoughts would drift back to Sophia. I imagined her waking up to an empty house, the look of confusion on her face as she found my letter and the slow, crushing realization of what she'd done. Part of me wanted to call her, just to hear her reaction, but I held back. I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing I still cared enough to listen. Instead, I put all my energy into building a wall between my old life and this new chapter. I deleted my social media accounts, changed my email, and ignored the occasional calls from unknown numbers, which I assumed were Sophia or someone she'd enlisted to track me down. Each unanswered call felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was finally in control of my own life. Starting over wasn't easy. I found myself missing so much. Friends, familiar routines, and even small things like the way sunlight poured through the kitchen window in the mornings. But every time I felt a flicker of temptation to turn back, her words would come rushing back to me. "I'm not attracted to you anymore." The sharp bitterness in her voice, the casual cruelty of her confession, and then the betrayal of the kiss. It wasn't just hurt. It was the shattering of something sacred, something I couldn't rebuild no matter how much I might have wanted to. By the end of that first week, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about running away from her or the life we shared. It was about ensuring she felt the weight of her actions. She needed to understand what it was like to lose everything, to wake up one day and realize the person you'd built your life around was simply gone. I didn't want to just vanish. I wanted her to grapple with the consequences of what she'd done, in ways she couldn't ignore. As I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, staring at the blank walls that surrounded me, a plan began to take shape. Leaving her behind wasn't enough. She needed to feel the same sting of loss, the same gut-wrenching pain that I felt now. She needed to suffer the way I was suffering. Back at the house, Sophia woke up to the pounding in her head, a hangover reminder of the night before. The second thing she noticed was the silence. Normally, I'd be in the kitchen by then, brewing coffee or scrolling through my phone while seated at the table. But this silence was different. It was heavy, wrong, like the absence of something vital. She groaned, rubbing her temples as she rolled over to glance at the clock. 10:47 a.m. It was late, even for a sluggish Saturday morning. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she shuffled into the hallway, her voice groggy as she called out, "David, you here?" No response. The unease began as a tiny whisper in the back of her mind. But with each empty room she checked, it grew louder. By the time she made it to the kitchen, it was a full-blown alarm. The space was immaculate. No coffee brewing, no dishes in the sink. Just an eerie, sterile stillness. And then her eyes landed on the letter. It was folded neatly on the counter, my handwriting scrawled across the top spelling out her name. But something about it looked different, colder, more deliberate. She reached for it with trembling hands, unfolding the paper to reveal the short message inside. Her eyes darted over the words. Once, twice, a third time, and then the weight of it hit her like a punch to the chest. "Sophia, I heard what you said, and I can't unhear it. You took something from me that I can't get back. Not just my trust, but the belief that we were a team. I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. Don't try to find me." Her knees buckled, and she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, clutching the letter like a lifeline. Fragmented memories from the night before began rushing back, hitting her in disjointed pieces. The party, the drinks, the fight, and then her own words. "God, what did I say?" came back to her, not all at once, but enough. She remembered laughing, mocking me, saying things she shouldn't have, or maybe things she meant but hadn't intended to say out loud. And then there was the kiss. A fleeting, stupid moment with a coworker she barely knew. Her stomach churned as shame and panic set in, waves of guilt crashing over her. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed my number. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Switching to text, she fired off messages in a desperate flurry. "David, please call me. Where are you? I'm so sorry. Please come home." One after another, her messages went unanswered. By the time she gave up, tears were streaming down her face, and her heart was racing with the terrifying realization that I was really gone. The next few days were hell for Sophia. At first, she convinced herself that I just needed time to cool off, that I'd come back once I'd had a chance to think things through. But as hours turned into days, the reality became undeniable. I wasn't coming back. She called everyone she could think of. Our friends, my coworkers, even my parents, but no one could tell her where I was. Or if they knew, they weren't saying. Desperation drove her to call the police, but her pleas were met with detached indifference. "He's an adult," the officer said flatly. "If he wants to leave, that's his choice. It doesn't sound like he's missing, just that he doesn't want to be found." The officer's words stung Sophia, but they also rang painfully true. Refusing to accept it, she threw herself into the search, combing through every shred of our shared life for clues. She dug into bank accounts, emails, and credit card statements, but I had been meticulous. The accounts were empty, the cards canceled, and even my email had been deactivated. It was as though I had simply ceased to exist. Sophia's life began to unravel faster than she ever anticipated. Without me to share the load, the financial strain hit her like a freight train. She hadn't realized how much of the household stability had quietly rested on my shoulders. The mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. I'd handled it all without complaint, and now, with everything squarely on her plate, she was drowning. Her once vibrant social life started to crumble. The same friends who had laughed with her over brunches and swapped stories during late-night chats began to drift away. Whispers about her behavior at the party had made the rounds. Rumors of infidelity, drunken confessions overheard by people she thought were her confidants. At work, the co-workers who once admired her charm and confidence now kept their distance. Their polite smiles felt forced, their conversations brief. Sophia tried to keep up appearances at the office, but the cracks were showing. Missed deadlines piled up. She snapped at colleagues over minor issues and spent more time staring blankly at her computer screen than getting any real work done. One afternoon, her boss called her in for a meeting. His tone was neutral, but the concern in his eyes was unmistakable. "Is everything okay, Sophia? You haven't seemed like yourself lately." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a strained smile. "Just dealing with some personal stuff." "Well, if you need time off, let us know," he replied, his voice professional but with a clear undertone. Her performance was slipping, and she was running out of chances. At night, the house felt unbearably empty. She wandered aimlessly from room to room, looking for anything that might make her feel closer to me. An old t-shirt, a notebook I might have forgotten. Anything to bridge the gaping void I'd left behind. But there was nothing. I had taken everything of importance with me, leaving behind only memories. And for Sophia, those memories hurt more than anything else. Her loneliness drove her deeper into the bottle. The drinking started as a way to numb the guilt and fill the quiet, but it quickly became its own monster. Alcohol didn't silence her mistakes. It amplified them. She found herself haunted by relentless questions. Why hadn't I stopped myself? How could I have destroyed something so good? The answers eluded her, but the regret was suffocating. Sophia had always seen me as steady, dependable, unshakable. She never imagined that I could leave, or that I might reach my breaking point. But now she knew, and as the days turned to weeks, one thought consumed her entirely. She had lost me, and she had no one to blame but herself. Starting over wasn't easy, but it gave me a sense of purpose. My days were simple at first: wake up, go for a run, and explore the city that I was slowly beginning to call home. I picked up a part-time job at a local hardware store, something low-stress that kept me busy and covered the bills. For the first time in years, I was living for myself and no one else. But no matter how far I ran or how much I buried myself in this new life, Sophia's betrayal clung to me like a shadow. Her words played on repeat in my mind, the disdain in her voice slicing through me anew each time. I couldn't shake the image of how carelessly she'd tossed aside everything we had built together. The anger simmered beneath the surface, a constant presence that threatened to consume me. I didn't just want to disappear from her life. I wanted her to feel what I had felt: broken, humiliated, and utterly alone. The first step in my plan was to gather information. I knew Sophia well enough to predict her next moves. She wasn't the type to let go easily, and I was certain she'd try to find me. Creating a fake social media account was simple. Under a false name and a nondescript profile, I slipped into her online world unnoticed. I blended into the background, watching as her life unfolded in bits and pieces, preparing for the next move in my carefully crafted plan. She hadn't bothered to make her profiles private, which made it all too easy to track her life from a distance. Her posts painted a clear picture of her unraveling, confirming everything I had suspected. The updates were sporadic and increasingly erratic, each one more desperate than the last. A photo of an empty coffee mug with the caption, "Mornings aren't the same without you." A late-night selfie, her eyes red and swollen, a drink clutched in her hand, accompanied by a vague, melancholic message. She was falling apart, and I knew it was only the beginning. From the safety of my distance, I began to make subtle, calculated moves to push her further toward the edge. Knowing where she worked, I created an anonymous email account and sent a carefully crafted message to her boss. It wasn't explicit. I didn't want it to scream bitter ex-husband, but it hinted at her drunken behavior at the party and suggested an inappropriate office relationship. I planted just enough doubt to make them question her professionalism. A few weeks later, I saw one of her posts. Work stress is at an all-time high, feeling like I can't catch a break. I allowed myself a grim smile, imagining the hushed whispers in the office and the subtle changes in how her colleagues treated her. Next, I turned my attention to her social circle. I remembered the coworker she'd kissed at the party, the one who had been overly friendly. It didn't take much effort to find him online, and a quick message to his wife. Yes, he was married, was all it took to stir chaos in his personal life. I didn't mention Sophia by name, but I knew the fallout would inevitably reach her. Soon after, her posts became even more frantic, her once effortless smiles now stiff and forced. A group photo at a happy hour was captioned, "Trying to stay positive." But the tension in her expression was unmistakable. The cracks in her carefully curated persona were growing wider. Even as I watched her life unravel, there were moments when doubt crept in. Was I going too far? Was this truly justice, or had I disguised petty revenge as righteous retribution? But then, I'd recall the pain of that night, her cold words, the betrayal, the humiliation, and my resolve would harden once again. She had destroyed everything we'd built together. She deserved to feel the same emptiness I had felt. One evening, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The sender's name stopped me cold. James, a mutual friend. I hadn't spoken to anyone from my old life since I'd left, so seeing his name was like a ghost from the past. Subject, just checking in. David, Sophia's been asking around about you. She's not doing well. I don't know what happened between you two, but I thought you should know. James. I stared at the email for what felt like forever, my emotions in turmoil. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell him everything, to unload the weight of my anger and betrayal. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. No explanation could undo what she'd done or make the pain disappear. Instead, I channeled my energy into doubling down. I created fake accounts and sent her anonymous messages, each one designed to twist the knife. Do you regret it? One message read. Another simply said, you don't deserve forgiveness. Over time, her once polished online presence crumbled into near silence. When she did post, the sadness in her eyes was impossible to miss. She was struggling, and I knew I was the reason. But despite everything, something still felt off. Watching her life fall apart from afar didn't bring the satisfaction I'd imagined. I wanted her to know it was me. I wanted her to face the full weight of what she had done, and I needed to see her reaction with my own eyes. As I sat in my small, bare apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my new life, I realized the truth. The time for hiding was over. To truly close this chapter, I had to confront her. Weeks had stretched into months, and yet the revenge I had once imagined as sweet now felt hollow and unfulfilling. The only way forward was face to face. It was time to end this once and for all. I wanted Sophia to fully grasp the depth of the pain she had inflicted, not just through the consequences of her actions, but by confronting it head-on. She needed to hear my voice again, not for reconciliation, but for the reckoning she had earned. One evening, I sat down and typed out an email. It wasn't long, just enough to make my presence known and remind her of the destruction she had caused. Subject, stop looking. Sophia, I see you've been trying to find me. Stop. I'm not coming back. I've moved on, and I owe you nothing. But I want you to know this. Every tear you've cried, every piece of your life that's fallen apart, it's only a fraction of what you deserve. You betrayed me, and now you're paying the price. You don't get to ask for forgiveness. You made your choice, and I made mine. Goodbye forever. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment, hesitation creeping in. Would this reignite the pain for both of us? Was I doing the right thing, or just lashing out? But my anger silenced the doubt. I clicked the button, and the words flew into her inbox. Her response came faster than I had anticipated. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. A notification from the burner email I'd set up for anonymity. Subject, please talk to me. David, please just talk to me. I'll do anything. I don't know what's worse, what I did to you or what I've done to myself because of it. I've lost everything, and I know I deserve it. But I need to say I'm sorry. Please let me say it. Her words struck like a small earthquake, subtle but unsettling. I could feel her desperation and regret, but instead of softening me, it fueled the embers of my anger. Rather than respond directly, I decided to push her further. I composed another anonymous message, this time posing as someone who had overheard the whispers at her workplace. Subject: word gets around. Lisa, did you really think no one would find out? People know what you did. You can't hide from it forever. The message was vague but pointed enough to stoke her paranoia. I pictured her reading it, her heart racing, wondering who knew and how much they had uncovered. Did they know about the affair? The drunken confession? Would they tell others? The thought brought a grim sense of satisfaction. A few days later, another email from Sophia appeared in my inbox. This one was longer, almost frantic. Subject: I'm sorry, David. If you're reading this, I need you to know how sorry I am. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I wouldn't blame you if you hated me forever. I hate myself for what I did. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it all away. I don't know if you'll ever see this, or if it even matters, but I loved you. I still love you. Losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever gone through, and I don't know how to fix the damage I've caused. Please, if there's any part of you that still cares, let me say this to your face. I need to see you, to know if there's even a shred of hope left for us. Her words landed differently this time. The anger I had clung to for months felt heavier, harder to carry. Was this what I had wanted all along? For her to feel broken, desperate, and alone? Or had I wanted her to understand the depth of the love she had betrayed? I decided it was time to confront her. Not to forgive, but to ensure she truly understood the gravity of what she had lost. Using the burner email, I sent her a message with a location and a time. Subject: if you want to talk, if you have something to say, meet me here tomorrow at 3 p.m. A quiet coffee shop downtown. You'll have 5 minutes. The next day, I arrived early. The coffee shop was quiet, half filled with patrons sipping lattes or tapping away on their laptops. I chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and waited. Right on time, Sophia walked in. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes scanning the room nervously. When her gaze landed on me, her expression shifted, a fragile mixture of relief and heartbreak. "David?" she breathed, her voice barely audible as she crossed the room and sat down across from me. I didn't say a word, letting the silence between us grow heavier with each passing second. Sophia sat there, her hands fidgeting nervously, her lips trembling as she struggled to find the right words. "I don't even know where to start," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything, for the things I said, for what I did. You didn't deserve any of it." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. My expression remained unmoved. "You're right," I said flatly. "I didn't." She flinched at the sharpness of my words, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was stupid, selfish. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought—" She paused, her voice cracking. "I thought I wanted more, something different, but I was wrong. I lost the best thing I ever had, and I can't fix it." Her confession hung in the air, heavy with regret and self-loathing. For a fleeting moment, I felt a faint flicker of pity, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt she'd caused. "Sophia," I said finally, my tone steady but cold, "do you have any idea what it feels like to hear the person you love tell you they don't want you anymore? To find out they betrayed you in the worst possible way? Because that's what you did to me." "I know," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, and I'll regret it every day for the rest of my life." "Good," I said, standing up and staring down at her. "You should." Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there, broken and alone, just as she had left me. As I stepped outside and felt the cool air hit my face, an overwhelming sense of finality washed over me. The confrontation I had both dreaded and, in some twisted way, longed for was over. Sophia's tears, her broken voice, and her desperate apologies had all been laid bare before me. But instead of the satisfaction I had expected, I felt only a hollow ache where my anger had once burned. For months, I had lived for this moment, believing it would bring me closure. But as I rounded the corner, leaving Sophia behind for good, a profound realization struck me. I wasn't free. Not yet. In the days that followed, I wrestled with the weight of my emotions. Anger had been my fuel for so long that letting go of it felt almost impossible. My new life had been built on the foundation of my resentment, and now that foundation was beginning to crumble. I tried to drown the unease in work, longer runs, and hours spent in the solitude of my apartment. But no matter what I did, Sophia's words from the coffee shop haunted me. I'll regret it every day for the rest of my life. Regret. It wasn't a word that belonged solely to her. It was something I was carrying, too. One restless night, unable to sleep, I pulled out a journal I had picked up at a thrift store and started writing. For the first time, I let everything spill onto the pages. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fury, and the hollow emptiness that had followed. The act of writing felt like releasing a pressure valve, slowly lifting the weight I had been carrying for so long. When I finally put the pen down, I stared at the filled pages for what felt like hours. I didn't know if I was searching for forgiveness, for her or for myself, or simply a way to move forward. But one thing became clear. I couldn't keep living like this. My life couldn't revolve around Sophia and what she had done to me. It had to be about me, my healing, my future, my happiness. Sophia, meanwhile, was facing her own reckoning. Though I had no direct contact with her, bits and pieces of her life filtered back to me through mutual acquaintances. She had taken a leave of absence from work, her once flawless image now a distant memory. People rarely saw her outside her house, and when they did, they described a shadow of the woman she used to be. A small part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her I understood her pain and that I wished her well. But I knew better. Some wounds are too deep to be soothed by words, and some chapters are best left closed. That chapter of my life was closed, and reopening it would only invite more complications I didn't need. As the weeks turned into months, I began rebuilding my life with a renewed sense of purpose. I enrolled in evening woodworking classes, finally pursuing something I'd always been curious about but never had the time for. I joined a local hiking group where I met new people, friends who didn't know anything about my past and didn't need to. Little by little, the pieces of my life started to come together. One day, while hiking a trail through the nearby mountains, I stopped to take in the view. The sun was setting, bathing the landscape in a warm, golden light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt at peace. The betrayal I had endured was still a scar, but it no longer defined me. I had survived, and I was stronger for it. As for Sophia, I could only imagine what her life had become. Perhaps she was still trying to pick up the pieces, sorting through the wreckage she had created. Maybe she had found some kind of redemption, or maybe she remained trapped in a cycle of regret. I would never know, and for the first time, that was okay. Life doesn't always come with a clean resolution. People hurt each other, make mistakes, and carry their scars in different ways. What I had come to understand was that healing doesn't come from revenge, or even closure. It comes from letting go. One quiet spring morning, I made a decision that felt symbolic. I burned the journal where I had poured out all my pain, my anger, and my heartbreak. I watched as the flames consumed the pages, the smoke rising into the sky like a final goodbye to that chapter of my life. When the last ember died out, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't the same man who had walked out of Sophia's life that night, and for that I was grateful. I had discovered a new version of myself, stronger, wiser, and no longer shackled to the past. As I walked away from the ashes, I thought about the lesson I would carry with me forever. You can't control what others do to you, but you can control how you respond. And with that, I moved forward, leaving behind both the pain and the revenge, ready to embrace the life that was waiting for me.